The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
We've got Joanne Myers, and we'll be talking about her books, and one of them, Murder Most Foul. Joanne, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
So let's introduce you to the audience. So exactly, where did you start writing, and what kind of books are you writing?
Well, I started writing as a child. I'm originally from Ohio, a small town in Ohio. I started writing as a child, and I just stayed with it. As I said earlier, I was raised by a mother who did not approve of any type of art, so she never gave me any encouragement to do anything artistic. So I put that on the back burner and got to it later in life. But I write all different types of genres. I write mystery, I write science fiction, fantasy, supernatural, true crime, and poetry.
Well, pretty amazing. So when you got into writing true crime, I noticed one of your books, too, called Twisted Love, and it's 12 true stories. What brought you to that sort of subject and that book?
Well, I've always been fascinated by why people murder, why go that far. I mean, that's probably like the worst crime that you could ever do against anybody. And I just was always fascinated about how the mind of a serial killer works. And it just fascinated me. I mean, true crime is what somebody actually went through. I mean, they experienced it. And true experiences is, the worst type of experience that you can go through. And it just fascinated me.
Pretty incredible. Now, your newest book is called what? Crime of the Century? That's the newest one you've just put out?
Yeah, The Crime of the Century. It's a true story. It was from a 1982 double homicide from a small town that I was living in called Logan, Ohio. And it took, they convicted the wrong man. They convicted a man that did not commit the crimes. He was a pervert, but he didn't actually commit the crimes. And he went to prison anyway. He was sentenced to death row. He was on death row for 5 years before he was exonerated. And then in 2009, I believe, is when DNA was used to test some of the evidence that was found at the crime scene, and it came back to matching two local men who I knew those men from living in that town. And so altogether, it took almost 30 years to find the real killers of those two teenagers.
Wow. So he wasn't a very good man, you're saying. He was a pervert, so he was kind of a bad person already?
Right. He was a stepfather, and he wasn't a good person. He had been molesting the girl. He had threatened all her boyfriends and things like that. I mean, he intimidated a lot of people, and the community hated him. Hated his wife because she knew about the molestation, and she put up with it and didn't stop it, and their entire lives were ruined by the arrest. They lost everything, their property. When he was convicted, the wife divorced him, and they moved to separate states, and so he had a hard life and everything like that. But again, I don't know, he wasn't a good person, so I'm not really sure what to say about that.
Hi, Joanne, it's Julie. If I may just take you back a couple of steps in terms of your own experiences.
Okay.
You described this kind of creative flair. I've had a look at your webpage, and you certainly have an extensive resume, if you might like to call it, of different things that you do. And
yes.
You've described being very creative from a very young age. And having parents that really were quite opposing of this. They didn't understand the need for it, and therefore weren't helpful. But there must have been somebody that supported you or continued that drive within you to help you achieve what you have done today. So who was that person that you looked up to?
Well, I can't say I looked up at anybody. I didn't have a role model. I never had a role model. It was just something that I wanted to do. It was always just me, something that I needed to do to be happy, and writing is really the only thing that keeps my interest. I can't really do anything but besides write. I work outside the home and all that, but I can't think of anybody that, gave me encouragement or anything like that.
Was there anybody that you would look up to, though, because it's not just writing, you've drawn, you've been in some acting roles, so the creativity is quite vast. So is there somebody that you would have looked up to as a youngster, somebody that you would want to be like?
No, I think it was just fascinated with different things, how people paint. I love art. I love all the old painters, and Van Gogh and Monet and all them. And the actresses, the acting, I've always been interested. I love watching TV. I love movies. And I love putting, life into a fictitious character. And I just always thought it would be great, to be up on the silver screen and doing things like that. And as a child, I performed in school plays, things like that.
One of the things on your website that intrigued me is, and forgive me because this is not critical, it's trying to understand. Is that you take inspiration when you have writer's block. You tell people to take inspiration from true life experiences that may be depicted in television programs. And the reason that I was interested in that is because I generally tend to do a lot of the paranormal interviews on House Mystery, and that was interesting to me that you talked about some of them being true life, and when we talk about some of them being true life, it means that we're saying others aren't. So how do you choose what ones to write about when the inspiration is actually not from your own investigation, but from the investigation of others?
Yes, it's from the investigation of others. You meet people going through life, you work with people, you go to school with people, and, they do things, they tell you things, and I just take bits and pieces of what I've seen and heard over the years and just turn it into a story somehow.
So, but other than true stories, or
some of them are true, yes. Some of them are true stories, things that happened to my friends or my school classmates or something like that, and I take those true stories and I add to it. So a lot of them are based on people that I've met over the years.
Okay, so there'll be components that are true, but you embellish them for the storyline. Yeah,
a lot of times I do, yes.
And have you thought about doing? With your interest in the fantasy and of ghosts and spirits, the world of the paranormal, have you thought about doing interviews with people and recording first-hand accounts and telling them as they recall Because one of the things that I've found over many years of investigating the paranormal is this false sense of, we depict other people's accounts, but we don't test it out. And we only actually go to investigate somebody else's memory of something. We don't walk into a room and suddenly say, oh yes, this is a brand new property, no history, nothing, and we're going to investigate here today. No, there's been no reported activity, but we're just going to do it for the sake of it, and I'm sure we'll find something. We don't do that. We hear an account, and then we go and we revisit and we investigate somebody else's experience and memory. So have you thought about doing anything along that line where you don't have to embellish it because you're looking at something more factual?
No, I haven't done that. I've tried to interview people with my true crime book, The Crime of the Century, and all I got was a bunch of closed doors and everything. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to be interviewed and things like that. So that was a big disappointment. Nobody just wanted to get involved with it. I don't know if it's because it came from a small town or because it's such a heinous crime, I don't know, but I usually get turned away. If I try to contact people, I usually just get turned away.
And so did you have the same experience with Murder Most Foul?
Murder Most Foul? No, Murder Most Foul is a fictitious book based on that true crime and everything. And, yes, so it's a mystery, it's a detective crime novel is what that is.
So you found it easier to write because you didn't have to go and approach people for actual facts, so you could just base it on a true crime and
right. That's how I thought. Yes, that's how I wrote Murder Most Foul. The other ones I researched and things like that to find out the facts about them. But it's not easy trying to locate people. I've never had luck in it. I've called around and tried to get photographs from newspaper clippings and things like that, and I couldn't get anything. Nobody wanted anything to do with it. So I just had to do things my way to get anything done.
So in the in this Crime of the Century book, what was the murder like? Maybe explain the scenario of what happened.
Two teenagers came up missing. They were 18, 19-year-old teenagers, boyfriend and girlfriend, came up missing, and the boy's father reported them missing to the police department. And they didn't really take serious account of it. They figured they just, ran away or whatever. And then about 14 days later, while they were doing a search, they found torsos. They found two chopped up torsos floating in the river. And then that's when they cordoned the entire cornfield off and started doing a search. And within 4 days, they found the body parts and things like that. And they were arranged in a circular pattern to indicate satanic worship of some kind. And there's a lot of rumors and things like that in those counties that I was living at that had a lot to do with devil worshippers and things like that. The Hells Angels motorcycle gang, they were living up there at one time in that county, and they were rumored to have something to do with it. And it was turned out to be that the two killers, when they finally actually caught the real people, it was their ideal to cut the bodies up and make it look like devil worshippers did it, to throw suspicion off of them, is what it is.
So, Joanne, how much research did you have to do to understand satanic rituals, devil worship, gangs?
Oh, I did. I watched documentaries. I went to the library and looked it up in different books and things like that.
So now you said that they arrested the wrong guy and convicted him and stuff. How did the town feel at the time that this was all going on? Were they really scared of satanic sort of thing going on, or did they believe it, or what was? Well,
yes, some of them believed it. Well, when it first happened, after the torsos were found, they closed the schools down and wouldn't let anybody go back to school for a couple of weeks. They figured they would have it solved by then, but they didn't, and they finally realized that you can't keep kids out of school, because they may never solve this double homicide. So they let the kids go back to school, but it was under supervised ratings. Volunteer parents came out and they walked kids to school. There was parents on all the corners watching the children. They had a lot of extra police on duty. And right after school let out, everybody was, expected to go home right then and there. You couldn't linger around. They wouldn't let Halloween go on that year, and they didn't let Halloween go on in that year for 4 or 5 years, in that town for 4 or 5 years, because they were afraid that, something like that would happen again. But, it was just a public hysteria is what it basically is. And, so a lot of people were scared. And, because the killers were still out there. And they weren't sure if the killer was, a local person or somebody that was just passing through, a drifter or something. So, but they took precautions as best that they thought they could back in, the 80s and stuff. And they had a lot of extra people watching out for children. And they started, neighborhood watches and things like that. Anything suspicious, they would report it and stuff like that. Anybody that came into town that was a stranger driving through, they would always be stopped. The cars would be checked, things like that. So there was a lot of hysteria.
Why did they arrest the guy that they did and follow through with him? What is it that they had for evidence or to convict him?
That was the stepfather, the girl's stepfather. And she had been telling people at school, classmates and teachers, that he had been molesting her since she was about 11. And they figured, and at the time, police figured, well, if he's molesting her, he must have killed her too. And, ex-boyfriends of the girl they came forward and said that the stepfather had threatened to castrate them if they were having sex with the girl. And he would, the boys, when they would pick the girl up at their trailer and stuff, they would go inside, and the stepfather would be in there cleaning his guns right in front of, the boy and stuff like that. And the man just intimidated everybody that the girl went out with. And he grabbed a hold of a couple of them and shook them up real good and things like that. So he was just basically a bully.
Yeah, but did they actually have any evidence, or what was? It was just because of who he was, is that why they were suspicious then?
Yes, it was a case of circumstantial evidence. There was no evidence of his DNA being found at the cornfield. But this was back in '82. They didn't really use DNA then, and they couldn't really do anything for the blood either, the blood types and things like that. But it was just basically circumstantial evidence. And witnesses came forward and said, yes, I saw him, threaten the two teenagers and force them into, a car that matches this man's car. Well, that turned out to be not true, but the man swore by his statement, and he got $8,000 reward out of it. And it turned out not to even, be him. It was just somebody else that might have looked like the stepfather or looked like the two teenagers, but there was no connection. But the man got the $8,000 out of it, and he testified in court under oath that, yes, he saw the stepfather force those two teenagers into the car by gunpoint and drive off. So people testified against him. He was caught in lies. He said he had never left his property on the day of the murders, and that turned out to be a lie because he was at a gas station paying for gasoline with a check, and the date was on the check. So police, caught him in, lies, things like that. But there was no physical evidence, DNA or anything like that found at the crime scene that belonged to the stepfather. It was just basic his lies and his attitude toward the case. He didn't have a good attitude. He wanted to go and help with the search party when they first had the initial search party, and the police said, "Well, do you really want to do that since they've been missing for several days?" And he said, "Yes, seeing dead people don't bother me because I used to drive a hearse for a funeral home, and seeing dead people don't bother me, and that's not really something you should say if you got a missing teenager." And it was just he told people he was psychic. Who's going to believe that? And that turned out not to be true. And they did bring psychics in. They brought at least 2 psychics in to testify in court and things like that. And everybody was just against the stepfather. His strange behavior is what made the police focus on him. His attitude, his words, his behavior is what focused the police on him.
So after he was convicted in that, what led them to decide to search for DNA years later? And who was behind that? Like, why did it happen?
I'm not sure who was behind it. Let me see. Her name was Judy. She had been interviewed not long after the crimes took place, but she had forgotten about it was her husband. It was her husband, Kenny, that helped kill the teenagers. It was Kenny and his friend Chester. And Judy kind of knew that. She wasn't told that, but her husband went home that evening with a big slash down his arm where he had been severely sliced with a knife. And she just put 2 and 2 together. The friend left town right away. And it was years later when she had always been in trouble with the law for drugs and things like that. And she was on probation again, so she goes and reports to her probation officer one week, and this was a probation officer that was in the habit of asking people about this case because he was still interested in solving the case. And he just happened to ask her that day, do you know anything about this crime? And that's when she said, oh, yeah, I remember. That was my husband's friend, Chester. He had something to do with it. That's what I always thought. I mean, she wasn't sure. She wasn't there when the murder took place, but her husband and his friend Chester are the ones that she always suspected, and she just kept her mouth shut for, her own personal reasons. And that's basically how it they started investigating Chester, and when they tracked him down, he was in a out-of-state prison for raping young girls. He had had a sex problem in his entire life. And according to police, when they went and talked to him about the murders, he said, what took you so long? It's like he had been waiting all those years for them to arrest him on this charge. He admitted to it right up front. So I don't think he didn't even have to go to court. He just took a plea bargain. I think he got an extra 25 years out of it or something. He's still in prison. He'll probably die there. And that's basically how it got started. Judy is the one that finally broke down and remembered things, and that's when they started testing the DNA at the cornfield that they had found, and it matched her husband's DNA from where he had sliced his arm and stuff. And that happened when they were chopping up the bodies, because Kenny did not know how to do that. And Lester, he was a big hunter. He knew how to slice body parts off and things like that, skin deer and stuff. And so that's why one of the bodies was all chopped up and sloppy, and the other body was well sliced up, like a surgeon would do. And so that's how they knew there was more than one person involved. But a devil worshiper was brought into the case, and he said he believed it was an entire coven of witches that did it. But it turned out to be two men. And Kenny accidentally sliced his arm while he was chopping up one of the bodies. He blamed everything on Chester. Chester took out this gun, and I saw him shoot these two kids, and I was afraid he's going to shoot me, so I did what he told me to do to keep from dying. They blamed it on each other is basically what happened. Okay. So nobody really knows but them, whose idea was it. But Kenny always said it was Chester that had the gun, that he was after sex from the girl at that time. And the girl's boyfriend got in the middle of it, and Chester whipped out a gun and shot him twice and got him out of the way. And then he started shooting at the girl because she started screaming and freaking out. So that's how that happened.
So now, what happened? So the guy that got convicted and was on death row, and then now they found out he didn't do it. What's happened to him since then? Do we know where he's at now and how he lived after?
Well, he remarried. He did sue. He got an undisclosed amount of money for wrongful imprisonment. I do believe he passed away a couple of years ago, though. He was in his 80s. I believe I read that somewhere. And he had tried for several years to get out of prison and stuff, but the Ohio senator would not allow it. The governor, he would not allow it, and the appeals were always turned down. But his attorneys never gave up on him. The attorneys always fought for him and stuff, and eventually he was released, and he was completely exonerated from the crimes. And I gave him the right to sue for money, which he did and received. And him and his new wife were living in Grove City, Ohio at the time. But I believe he's died since then.
What is the thing you hope people get out of this book after they've read it? To know who you're associating with, to know your surroundings, know who you're associating with. Don't trust anybody that you think is a friend. These kids thought these two men were friends because they had bought marijuana from them before, and they thought they could be trusted, and they couldn't be. And so just, bad people are everywhere is what this book is about. Bad people are everywhere. And you need to know your surroundings, and you need to be smart when you're out in public or around people, because you never know what's going to happen. So what are you planning on? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Al. How do people do that, Joanne? How do you? Because
what was that, dear?
How do you do that? How do you know about your surroundings? Because perpetrators are very skilled at hiding what they do, which is why they go under the radar and they don't get arrested. So I mean, it's just such a big statement to say, don't trust anyone you think is a friend, isn't it? That's really hard.
Yes, it is. But these two teenagers, barely knew these men. I mean, they weren't, they didn't buddy around a lot and stuff. They just bought marijuana from them from time to time. But, so I don't really know what to say to that, but, I always tell people, you know, be on your guard, you know what's going on around you. If you see or hear something you don't like, get out of there. You know, that's what I tell people. And, I'm very leery of people. You know, I don't get in the cars with anybody. I don't take rides from anybody. And, you do have to be careful because, you know, serial killers are, you know, clever people.
Absolutely, but it's about being proportionate, isn't it? Not everybody's a serial killer. Not everybody's going to cause harm. So it's that very fine balance that's needed.
Yes.
So you know, the message for yourself for other people from reading your book surely can't be just don't trust anybody. It has to be proportionate.
Yes, it does have to be proportionate. You should know the person, you know, more than just a few times and things like that. You should go with your gut feeling. Most people know what their gut feeling, whether or not they're in a situation they need to get out of. But, you know, I don't really know what to say to that. You know, it is hard to you know, anybody can be fooled, anybody can be tricked. So I don't know what to say to that. You just have to be extremely careful about who you hang out with and things like that and what you do. You know, they were into drugs and things like that. So, you know, that's never a good situation.
No, of course not. And it certainly sets a scene, doesn't it? And they're obviously very vulnerable. But from your own experiences, you've just said you wouldn't trust anybody. Now you're much more cautious and you don't take lifts with unknown people, etc., which is wise. That's totally what we would advise people, isn't it? But where did that come from for you? Was it about your research and understanding and knowledge of this case, or was it before then? Were you already quite a guarded person?
I was always a guarded person, yes. I always read the paper a lot. You know, you hear about crimes in the paper all the time. You see it on the news all the time. And, you know, people getting killed by their so-called friends. You know, I mean, you can get killed by your husband or your boyfriend, you know. I mean, you don't really know anybody, I don't think. You don't really know anybody. But I've always been a cautious person.
And how did you, I'm sorry, so I'm delving into this, and you have to tell me to be quiet, Joanne, if you don't want to answer, please, feel free.
That's okay.
But you've had a family, you've had relationships, and so how did you ensure that relationship you felt safe within the relationship, being so guarded yourself?
Well, I didn't move in with the person right away. I mean, I didn't live with most of them that I dated. And I usually met them at different places. I didn't always invite them over to the house. You know, I meet them somewhere out in public. And I would get to know them before that, you know, anything serious started happening.
Was there a trigger event in a relationship that you have had personally that's led you to be less trusting, or to have your trust kind of that your worry about trust and people's true personas to be ratified?
Well, I was married once at a young age, and that was a big disappointment. So that might have triggered, you know, my relationships with men about being careful about who I choose to date and things like that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because so many authors that we speak to have storylines or their interests informed by their younger years. Yes. And of course, we develop into adults based on those younger years, don't we? So it's you know, understandable.
Yes.
So for you going forward, what is it now you want to do next?
Well, I'm turning some of my short stories into screenplays. I'd like to see them, you know, turned into movies. That's what I'm doing right now.
Oh yeah, I read about that on your website. That's interesting. Tell us more about that.
Well, I'm entering contests and things like that, so I'm hoping they go somewhere. I belong to a couple of screenwriting. I belong to a screenwriting organization here in Dallas area, and the Women in Film Dallas. It's for screenwriters and people in the movie business, things like that. We get together once a month and talk about things. So I'm hoping to meet good contacts from those organizations.
And your short stories, what are they based on? Are they all very different, or are they similar themes?
Well, right now I'm working on the ones that are paranormal and the fantasy ones.
Okay. And do you have any particular paranormal stories that you really are interested in, or you really believe in?
Well, I'm writing the one I wrote was called Blood Ties. It's based on a true story of these identical twin girls, and the one turns up missing. And when she goes missing, her other twin starts having visions, bad things that happen to the twin. And because of these visions, she, at the end, solves her sister's kidnapping and murder. So there's a lot of twists and turns to that. She disguises herself to look like her twin, to go out to meet her twin's friends and everything, because the twin is separated from her husband. She's turning kind of wild and doing things that she really shouldn't be doing, going to places she shouldn't be going. So the twin disguises herself as the missing twin and gets involved with, the seedy side of life, things like that. And there's things that, puts her in danger, but she's still willing to do that to find out what happened to her missing twin.
That's fascinating.
How about let's give the listeners you have a website, so tell them what the website is, so if they want to come look you up or see some of your work.
Okay, it's www.booksandpaintingsbyjoanne.com.
Fantastic, and of course we'll have your book on our website as well, so people listening can just do one click and pick up the book and go to your website. Again, our guest has been author Joanne Myers. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me. You have a great evening now.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end!
I'll see you.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.